we'll take a closer look to the situation of North Macedonia, which has undoubtedly belonged to the most promising Western Balkan region countries of the last years. And for that, I really much appreciate to welcome Mr. Petar Arsovski, a well-known political analyst. So thank you for joining us and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Always a pleasure to work with IDM.
So thank you. And at first, I would like to go to the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic situation in North Macedonia. As we know, curfew yesterday, and although last week North Macedonia faced a shock due to a sudden rise of the infection rates, so I would like to ask you, Petar, what is the atmosphere regarding kind of lightening the restrictions, and also regarding the following weeks we can expect?
The atmosphere, some of the people are afraid that lifting the restrictions may mean a resurge of the pandemic, and we've certainly seen a rise over the past 2 weeks of some cases, where the lowest was about 12 a couple of weeks ago, and then rising up to 40 a week ago, with the numbers ranging from 26 today, 19 yesterday, 22 or 23 the day before. So there's a mix between some amount of fear and some amount of hesitance, of impatience in terms of lifting the measures. So it's mixed, as in all the countries. The region has differently responded to this. The main arguments put forward by the epidemiologists and the government is that they have now upgraded the healthcare capacity so that up to between 30 and 60 cases a day is something that the healthcare system can withstand with no significant problem. And that's why they're easing up the measures so as to improve the economic impact or sort of try to restart the economy in this situation. Also, it is highly difficult to maintain a curfew and high restrictions when all the countries surrounding you are opening up borders or have decided or announced they're going to open borders first week of June. So there seems to be a coordinated effort between the governments of Greece, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo and Albania, in which they're continuing negotiations to sort of start implementing the cross-border protocol all at the same time. So it's a mixed bag of feelings, some elation, some fear, some lack of patience. So people are still adjusting to the new reality. It certainly came as a surprise that the government decided to abolish most of the measures, although they may come out today or tomorrow with a new plan of how the new normal will look like. So they're claiming this is not a complete lift on measures, but it's an adjustment on how the life will look like up until maybe autumn.
And regarding the elections, we are expecting, because early elections should have taken place in April after being called in the end of last year by former Prime Minister Zoran Zaev himself. It looks like they might take place in July or in September. So what is your prospect? And with regards to that, you mentioned in a previous interview that the narratives regarding and related to the parliamentary elections campaign have to change. So in which direction should that be?
First of all, there is no particular progress being made in the last couple of days between the main parties on the Macedonian side regarding the election date. The government keeps pushing for early elections at the beginning of the summer period, actually right after the easing of, right after opening the borders, while the opposition keeps pushing for a later date, basically September, feeling that by then, the first boost that the government is getting for the management of the healthcare situation will have abated, and the economic crisis will follow, which will actually give the opposition a boost. There is no particular movement, but over the past 24 hours, a couple of parties here in the country, especially the main Albanian parties, have come up with a statement that the 5th of July, which is the first Sunday in July, is possibly an acceptable date and an acceptable compromise for them. If if the number of parties agreeing to the 5th of July increases, the main opposition party, VMRO, will be under a lot of pressure to accept that date, will be on board. In terms of the narratives of these elections, of course, the most obvious answer is that the narratives will have to change because of the COVID pandemic. And that what was previously the economic boost and democratization of society and the Euro-Atlantic integration, for that matter, which has received a big quantum leap during the COVID period, mainly with the NATO accession and the decision to start negotiations by the EU, will have to be substituted with a more pocketbook narrative, basically the continuation of the healthcare measures, what the new normal will look like, what the economic recovery will look like. And this, of course, also decreases the always present narratives which are interethnic and interreligious. So the interethnic and interreligious narratives will be decreased, according to my opinion, for the sake of the overall recovery in medical and economic terms of the country. So this is just a broad scoop of what the narratives will have to go towards an adjustment. And of course, we remain cautious about predicting whether the parties will reach an agreement or not. In the Balkans, being pessimistic is probably the safest bet, but we will see what happens.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the interethnic relations. I would like to know, can we say that when the socio-economic situation is facing challenges, that the interethnic relations, first of all, among the Macedonian and Albanian population, is then facing tensions and increasing. And when it, as we could see in the last years, when there are also highly important bilateral agreements, such as the Prespa Agreement with Greece in 2018, and also the NATO accession of North Macedonia, which was decided last year and then realized this year in March. When such agreements also on the international level are realized, and then here we can see the success that then interethnic relations within the country also can be decreased, as if that is right in that sense.
The interethnic relations within the country over the past decade, mainly before the Prespa Agreement, have been plagued by a diametrically opposed country as to what the country should look like 5 years in the future, where more than half of the Macedonians were willing to trade EU and NATO integration to keep the name, and 90% of the Albanians didn't care about the name and the ethnic romanticism of the Macedonians, wanted EU and NATO quickly. These were not nuanced differences. This is a diametrically opposed vision of the future of the country. This, in essence, created ethnic tension. It was not by public narratives, etc., but the main policies and the main pillars of the strategy of the future were different from Macedonians and Albanians. Most of this was dissipated with the Prespa Agreement, where I have to say that our Albanian citizens were very sensitive to how sensitive Macedonians are about this negotiation, played completely fair. There was a complete understanding, there was no pressure whatsoever, and the resolution of the Prespa Agreement and the subsequent membership into NATO and the decision to open negotiations by the EU has pretty much melted those ethnic differences away. So now the mainstream policy of the country is aligned to the majority, which consists of half of the Macedonians and almost all of the Albanians, but it constitutes a majority of the country. And now the narratives will shift to more pocketbook issues: better healthcare, local economic development, better social services, etc. But the main line and the baseline differences which threaten to destabilize the country are now practically dissolved.
And when we take a look at the parliamentary elections, which have to take place hopefully, so now in July, what is in your opinion, made Zoran Zaev again then be able to facilitate this process he started, this positive process, and on the other hand, which role is Nikola Gruevski, the former prime minister, who resigned in 2016 because of being accused of corruption, and then made possible all these developments which we could see and watch in the previous years. So which role Nikola Gruevski, from his asylum in Hungary, is going is relevant now? Is Nikola Gruevski then kind of a godfather, influencing the next campaigns and also the narratives against the NATO accession, against EU accession, and against this interethnic agreement within?
First of all, about the narratives of Zoran Zaev and what his political position is, and then about Gruevski. The polls have shown that in the past basically in the past 2 months, that the government of North Macedonia, like most governments in Europe, has gained a couple of points by decent management of the healthcare situation and a decent economic response. And this is certainly true for most of the countries in the region and most of the countries in Europe, by the way. For example, Italian Prime Minister got a 7% boost. So maybe not that big, but 3, 4, 5% boost is evident in the latest couple of polls for the then now ex-Prime Minister Zaev, but the leader of the party which is in power. This, in addition, is coupled with a sense that we are seeing in the analysis that says that people have invested so much into the change from the previous decade into a new narrative for the country, into a new direction, which is aimed at EU and NATO rather than away from it, that they're not willing to sacrifice this quickly. My assessment and probability is that people will not give up on this path fairly quickly, which means that my guess, and this is evident in the numbers as well, is that Zaev's party will be in a lead once the elections happen, especially if they happen sooner rather than later. Now this will certainly create a crisis in the opposition in Bulgaria, because they're sort of praying at the dwindling niche in the electorate. The number of people who are against EU and NATO, which is the catered audience for Bulgaria, is decreasing because the mainstream policy is now pointing at EU and NATO. And I think this explains a little bit of the research of activity by Mr. Gruevski. Of course, it is difficult to make an intelligent comment about his motives and strategy because he's a political fugitive. He's not present very much in the country. But the best assumption so far is that Mr. Gruevski wants to participate in the reform we think is coming in Bulgaria after the elections. For example, his social media activity has increased a couple of times. His communication with his party members, his posts about the current situations in the country have increased. So the assumption is that he wants to be a prominent part of the next stage of his party and the choice of in which direction they will take their new manifesto and platform and narrative.
Mm-hmm. And although he should legally be sentenced because he received political asylum, although and from the legal point of view he should be sentenced, and although these objectives and facts, he might be able to participate participate and to enter the political scene?
It is very difficult for Mr. Gruevski unless his party regains a huge percentage of MPs in the parliament to return legally to the political stage. But that doesn't mean that he will not have influence in his own party. And this is a recurring narrative of all the leaders of the parties in the Balkans. They never want to leave and actually let the parties evolve on their own. And this is certainly true for a lot of party leaders across the, well, basically south of Vienna, if you will. And this is a recurring narrative that we're seeing with Gruevski. So although a running candidate on any elections legally, because he has stood trial, he's been sentenced, he's actually a legal fugitive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he will not have influence in his own party. I think that as long as the anti-EU and NATO narrative exists in Gruevski will certainly have a hold in that particular audience. And he may want to use that leverage in the upcoming maneuvers within He may want to choose the successor, even though he doesn't want to appear himself. So this interplay, this ping pong, I am the Sultan in the shadow and you're my right hand in the party, is certainly a story that we've seen happen a lot of times in the Balkans. And I think this is the main narrative there.
Mm-hmm. And what we also are facing is the discussion on the judiciary in North Macedonia, and might it also be when this independence, the real independence of judiciary in North Macedonia, that it is possible that Gruevski at least is not able to enter the political scene from the legal point of view. And of course the influences and the networks is obvious, but at least from the legal point of view.
Gruevski still maintains heavy influence in the judiciary. This is mainly because over the past 12 years, basically, while his party was in power, 12 years, 15 years ago, he still, a couple of nominations of judges were happening, and I'm sure that he still has a certain amount of influence in the judiciary. That won't help him entering the political stage in a legal manner. What this does is it raises a red flag on the judiciary as the top tier of reform required by North Macedonia to actually start negotiations with the EU. And I think that the rule of law in general, not only the judiciary reform, but rule of law, petty crime and corruption, white-collar crime, government misuse of power, impunity, etc. These will all be recurring stories and recurring probes that the EU will push the country towards, and it will certainly be part of the narrative even in the upcoming elections, in spite of the COVID crisis, because this has been one of the major pillars where North Macedonia, maybe even more than what the other countries in the Balkans face, is facing in terms of urgent and upcoming challenges. So I think that will be a significant narrative. I don't know whether the current government, because their previous mandate up until the COVID crisis had been lost sort of in Prespa and the agreement with Bulgaria and the Euro-Atlantic integration, I don't know whether they will have the capacity to charge the judiciary and rule of law reform head on, but it is every single voter in the country. Especially because it's related to the EU, and EU is related to the perception of a better life.
And regarding the EU integration process and the starting the EU-accession talks, do you think that on the level of the European Council, the next election date is just awaited, so to start then with the fixed date, so that it's kind of waiting, because as we could see this year, there is the green light of the European Council to start with the accession negotiations, but it's still at this moment we still do not know which date. So might it be that there is just a waiting for the elections and then to start with the then new government, new voted government with the talks? So
I'm back.
Okay.
The last question was about the EU integration. Could you repeat the last part, please?
Yes. Okay. This what the question was not heard. Yeah. If the European Council is just waiting for the next election date and afterwards to start with the new elected government with the accession negotiations. Because we're waiting for 2 dates for the election, parliamentary election, as well as for the accession negotiations.
The timetable of the EU and in publishing the draft methodology seems to coincide with this conclusion, because the latest information is that the first draft of the negotiation methodology will be published the first week of June, or the first intergovernmental conference, if everything goes well and the methodology is accepted and everything is okay, should happen in Q4 of 2020. So this certainly seems to coincide that the elections will happen in the meantime, and the government will have a full mandate to actually proceed with the first intergovernmental conference. This is one of the main arguments being put forward by the current government, saying that we are now facing a disbanded parliament and a technical government only charged with elections. And that in fact the current institutions in the country do not have the full mandate to accept or not accept the negotiation methodology, because once it's done, it stays in place for the next decade, possibly. And this is one of the main arguments being put forward, that the lack of functioning institutions is something that should be solved quicker, sooner rather than later, so that the country can prepare better for a second wave of the election, of the possible pandemics in the fall, and also prepare for the upcoming intergovernmental conference and the negotiating framework. Now, this all sounds well if it clicks into place, but there is certainly a big if hanging around and maybe hiding in the meantime. And this is the issue that has arisen with Bulgaria and the negotiating framework and the EU-accession over the past maybe month. This is certainly something that has come as a bit of a mix of a surprise and a disappointment to the local government, because the previously signed agreement for good neighborly relations with Bulgaria pretty much should have guaranteed that no such lurking issues could have appeared so late in the game. However, it is what it is, and we will see what happens in the political stage with this.
It's the you meant the agreement of 2017, if I'm right. So, first of all, the dispute on the name of language of North Macedonia, and it's just called official language, and which has this disharmony, this bilateral disharmony. Is it only the language, or also the historic heritage, and then, for example, historic heroes as rebels to Ottoman rule and the like?
We always have trouble explaining what the problem really is, because most of our partners in discussions seem to fail to see how important romantic history and face is for these people here. On the face of it, it is a trivial issue, mainly consisting of two things. One is that there is no dispute by Bulgaria that a language called the Macedonian language exists. They want some sort of recognition that it originates somehow from the Bulgarian stem of languages, maybe some sort of confirmation that it's closer to Bulgarian than to Serbian, for whatever that's worth. And the second issue currently seems to be a dispute of the origin and genealogy of some historical heroes, mainly the prominent revolutionary Goce Delta. For what that's worth, that is what has been added to as an annex to the latest conclusions by the European Council, a unilateral annex by Bulgaria. Now, it seems on the face of it that this is not something that should be too worrisome, mainly because the agreement that you mentioned in 2017 was actually signed by Bulgaria in the Macedonian language and confirmed that they signed it in the Macedonian language. big dispute. Yet, I think there may be a mix of narratives there. One is that Boyko Borisov's government is composed of some nationalists, which he requires to maintain his position. So placating them in terms of or in terms of issues like this is something that could influence this. The second is this may be the last chance for Bulgaria to fight for some issues that they think are important before the start of the negotiations and in between the Prespa Agreement and the negotiations. And third, it may be just a nice side narrative for the upcoming elections in Bulgaria. So there may be a mix of this. Certainly, there is no deficit of problems in the countries of the Balkans. We often say that we have a problem for every solution. So that seems to encapsulate the current situation of the matter. It is still uncertain what is the ultimate strategy, what is the ultimate policy of Bulgaria. Most of the countries in the EU look at this issue with disdain, saying, "Oh no, not really. This is not something that could really happen. It is impossible that such a minor issue could stop such a big progress made by the Prespa Agreement." One interesting trivia may be that according to the Prespa Agreement, Greece is practically obliged to accept the Macedonian language. So if the current draft methodology does not include a specific notion of the Macedonian language, Greece is practically obliged to vote against it. So it's a mix of very complicated issues connected to emotions rather than ratio, connected to history rather than the future, all piled on top of one another always. So if you pull at one thread, you risk disassembling 17 threads down the line.
Okay, so we have a clash of interests all the time, and as you mentioned, for every solution a problem. I would like to ask you on the role of Russia regarding the coming elections and also regarding the EU integration, because as we could see, the Russian government was not excited about North Macedonia's NATO accession and also referred to several problems. So what might we expect from Russia now regarding the further developments?
More a political petty mischief than real strategic influence. The main mantra regarding the Russian influence in the Balkans has always been the following: they have no real interest in the Balkans. It's just they are not willing to expand a lot of resources and a lot of foreign diplomatic pressure to keep the Balkans out of the NATO, because this is a finished story. It is practically encapsulated by NATO, especially by Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria on this side. The real politics of Russia is to create some sort of petty mischief in the Balkans by using emotional and historic ties, while in fact this is leverage for Ukraine and Georgia, which they will never accept into NATO. Certainly, remnants of this doctrine in foreign relations remain active for Russia in the Balkans, and the more countries join NATO, the more aggressive maybe their rhetoric will look like. But the real resources and the real ground will probably decrease for Russia. So is some lateral influence, mainly social media, mainly fake news, financing some local portals, some local minor parties, and creating individual allies and assets to be active while the country is reforming towards NATO. So what we have seen is certainly an increase of fake news, an increase of fake social media nodes, if you want to call them that. Some financing of local portals, some financing of local parties, and picking influencers and opinion makers which they think would be sympathetic to their cause. So mainly a targeted, micro-targeted approach. Not that it is a bit different than Serbia, where Russia actually donated planes, donated military equipment, made a big parade. So it's more
level. And why?
Well, mainly because we're not worth it. The country is very, very small. It's landlocked, and it's basically landlocked on almost every side except. So it is a relatively isolated territory with not much political and geographic and economic worth, and especially with the realignment of the Macedonian and Albanian narrative, with no real potential to explode, only the potential to implode. So there's no real leverage for Macedonia in the region anymore, except maybe some influence in the resolution of the Kosovo issue, and as a catalyst or accelerator in necessary reforms in Serbia, but only as a showcase scenario.
And regarding the Macedonia and Albania and also Kosovo, because North Macedonia belongs to those countries which accept Kosovo's independence, what is this relation, or what are these relations like? First of all, after the NATO accession of North Macedonia, because it then seems that there's also an important factor of harmonizing bilateral relations to those countries.
In terms of the triangle between Pristina, Skopje, and Tirana, which are the main Albanian population, two narratives have always dominated this. One has always been the myth about Greater Albania, and whether this can be created and put all the Albanian people under one political umbrella. And the second has been this friendly rivalry as to which center will be the leading center for the Albanian elite in the Balkans. In terms of the first, for the Greater Albania, the biggest discussion has always been whether this it has never left the emotional will of the Albanian people. They've always wanted some sort of bigger integration among the people living across different borders. But the question has always been whether this is achieved by revolution or evolution. Accession into NATO by Albania and North Macedonia has certainly, according to my opinion, tipped the scales towards evolution. So the project of Greater Albania has now been substituted, rather than changing borders, with increasing cross-border cooperation, increasing communication, highways between the countries, increasing educational exchange, increasing ties, free movement of people and ideas. And this is certainly happening much to a greater extent between Kosovo and Albania and Macedonia and Albania. Of course, the full completion of the triangle would be the upcoming highway between Skopje and Pristina, which has been announced by the current government. And this will solve the first big narrative as to how will the Albanian peoples living in Kosovo, Albania, and North Macedonia really integrate. That will leave the second narrative open yet, and this is who will be the leader among the three towns. And with Kosovo lagging a little bit behind in terms of international resolution of the status and territory, it looks like the runoff is between Tirana and Skopje. And this certainly seems to tip towards Tirana, except that Albania is now plagued by political inclusiveness issues, democratization issues. How well will Prime Minister Rama integrate with the opposition? Whether there's really real movement for political dialogue there. But I think that this is an interplay that will go on for the next 5 years. I don't necessarily think that this is something that will be decided now. And listen, a little bit of healthy competition never hurt anybody.
So this is then an so-called inner Albanian topic, which is not related to state borders, but just centers of power in that way. Yes,
I think that the big pivot was the NATO accession. This is really something that the Albanians really cared about in the region. And they feel that things are tipping in their favor, with Albania and North Macedonia now entering the alliance, and Kosovo moving towards towards resolution, and this has really been a real deflation of the tensions with in terms of their future. There really seems to be a feeling that they think things are going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And regarding the interethnic relations, again, within North Macedonia, we could say in a way that North Macedonia is a good example and good practice of including ethnic minorities, because when we take a look at the population, there are more than 2 billion people in North Macedonia. From that, 66% are Macedonian people, and the minority, or if we might even call the Albanian population minority, but there are about 25%, and they're included in the government. And I would like to know from you, is it then not actual anymore as it was previous years ago that, for example, the Albanian population knew in Skopje where to go for shopping, to the markets, and on the other hand, the Macedonian one just they have these selected and divided markets and shops. Did all that decrease in the last time?
The political integration and the cultural and maybe consumer integration have happened in parallel. While it was still a question, like 10 years ago, whether a government can be formed with a majority of MPs without an Albanian partner, this is now no longer a question. So every government in the past 12 years, practically as a force of democratic tradition, has included the biggest number of the biggest Albanian party in the government. Secondly, we have now in these elections a breaking of another taboo, which is one of the biggest Macedonian parties, SDSM, has created a pre-electoral coalition with one of the four big, and they have now created a joint manifesto, joint program, and they're appearing together on the lists for the election. So this is breaking of another big taboo. And in the meantime, the language for the law on using the Albanian language, which requires all government institutions to be able to handle Albanian and other minorities' requests in their own language, so to be able to receive the questions and to be able to respond in their own language. The listing of the names and the toponyms in the other languages, this has all helped political integration to a great extent. As a consequence, cultural and maybe shopping or consumer integration has followed. For example, Skopje City Mall, one of the biggest shopping centers in town, which is smack in the middle of almost an exclusive Macedonian neighborhood, is one of the biggest destinations for shoppers from an Albanian background, Kosovo and North Macedonia and Albania as well. So it seems that in all issues, the tensions have slowly dissipated. It's moving in the right direction. Of course, now we come to the limit of actual democratic capacity of the country. It is not it is no longer a question of political will. It is now the question of political capacity. For example, North Macedonia lacks teachers in the Albanian language. As a consequence, most ethnic Macedonians who would like to learn Albanian language are not able to do so because there's simply not enough developed capacity to be able to force integration. Also, there are some changes that may be required in elementary school, whereby pupils who live in mixed neighborhood are not yet obliged to use each other's language, which should maybe happen. Maybe the use of the language law has interceded the government as the translator between the two big ethnic groups, where in fact maybe the government should take a step back and let them integrate and learn to understand each other on their own. But this is all a question of capacity, of change, but there's no more an issue of whether this is moving in the right direction or not.
Mm-hmm. And regarding the language capacities, when we take a look to former Yugoslavia, where everyone more or less Macedonian and Slovenian were languages of so-called was it the case that in North Macedonia itself that people knew three languages. So Serbo-Croatian, when it was called then, North Macedonian and Albanian, because I suppose that the segregation then with fall and with the break of maybe multi languages, so the capacity of B or three was more part of daily life then.
It's actually an excellent example and a very interesting issue to discuss, because this is one of the main parallels that we can draw to what is happening here and what happened before in Yugoslavia. This is an example of why there needs to be maybe government intervention in forced integration. If you leave people on their own, they will probably choose the easiest path. And this is not to learn an additional language, to safely move within their own upward social mobility, within their own ethnic group, within their own social, to actually not go out of their comfort zone. So at times, it is maybe advisable for the government to actually impose some sort of integration, and this starts by understanding one another. Mm-hmm. For example, in former Yugoslavia, if you were a Serbian living in Skopje, you would have to have your education done in Macedonia. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when you intervene with the government, when you intervene as a government, you have to want it really bad. You have to be fair and strict, but you cannot you cannot be lenient. For example, ethnic Macedonians living in municipalities which are dominated by ethnic Albanians, for example, should have to learn Albanian. Albanians who live in Macedonian municipalities or in general should be forced to learn Macedonian. So, but maybe we're not there yet. Maybe it's a question of lack of capacity and a lack of political will to implement it. But there certainly is a need, and this has been identified in the polling and among the people, that there is a need for further and better integration. And this all starts with language. So thank you for that example.
Okay. And also regarding daily life, when we also take a look at religious communities, we can also say that the Orthodox population or Macedonian Orthodox population is more than 61%, and the Muslim population more than 36%. And this is, I would say, also interrelated to ethnic belonging, and but not identically, of course. And I would like to ask you on the importance, not only ethnic belonging, but also the importance of religious communities regarding the Prespa Agreement, regarding the upcoming elections and bilateral relations.
All the countries in former Yugoslavia which used to be a communist regime, after the disintegration, have seen a sort of resurgence and revival of religious fervor, and they have, and suddenly all of the people in the country which for 50 years never mentioned God now seem to fall in love with God again. So it comes and goes. The influence and the importance of the religious communities, both the Muslim and the Christian, rises and declines depending on which is the mainstream narrative of the country. For example, for as long as the main government narrative was against EU and NATO, actually passive-aggressive towards EU and NATO, we saw a resurgence of the role of the church and the mosque. Then, after the resolution of the Prespa Agreement and moving towards the EU and NATO, turning actually to civil matters, we saw a decline of importance of the church and the mosque. And now, during the COVID pandemic, mainly because many people maybe find solace in the religion, and also because of the places of worship and the events of worship, we are seeing another revival spike of the importance of these religious institutions. However, the general feeling is that the separation is being kept fairly at arm's length, and that there is no clear mix between the country and the religion, much less so than under the previous government of former Prime Minister Gruevski, for example.
Mm-hmm. And this is also the contradiction that, for example, when just going back to history, when the former Yugoslavia was formed, and all the republics, that this is a historic contradiction that Tito then invented the Macedonian Orthodox Church to have a complete republic. And is that historic fact? Is it for the Orthodox community in North, talking about Prespa Agreement, as you previously mentioned, it had an important role, the Macedonian Orthodox Church, and yeah, this historic heritage, to what extent does it influence actual developments?
There is no lack of personality disorders in the Balkans, and there's no lack of insecurities, and this also applies to some Catholic churches, to some Christian churches. The insecurity of being an independent and sovereign church has always plagued the Macedonian Orthodox Church, and it has always colored some of their reactions towards maybe some sort of neurosis or personality disorder. In that respect, the main position of the church has always been that they oppose any change of the name. However, what was that it included some provisions for the ability of the Macedonian Orthodox Church to seek sovereignty through the Bulgarian Church, through the Greek Church, without the Greek Church being opposed to it, or the Serbian Church. So this was construed by the Orthodox Church as an opportunity to actually move their agenda forward in terms of sovereignty, and for that reason mainly, the Church was very passive and did not oppose the actual Prespa Agreement to a great extent. They have never publicly supported it, but they have not used any sort of influence and leverage to sabotage it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so everything sounds very positive. I do not know the concrete elections and EU negotiation talks. And my last question relies to, when we think about all the positive elections, relies to the situation of youth and young people in North Macedonia. So, in your opinion, what is this positive for part, of course, of the global corona crisis? But apart from that, so is this also influencing the atmosphere of young people not to leave the country, and what about brain drain and all the migration, immigration? Is all of these developments in the last years and months keeping young people in North Macedonia to ask in a provoking way?
Maybe we have painted too pink a picture of the country, and if that is the case, I apologize. There is a saying that, can you tell us a little bit what is happening in North Macedonia? Everything is good. Can you be a little bit more specific? Specific, not good. So maybe if we look at a little bit more detail, it is certainly true that some of the underlying problems of the country, like rule of law, prospects for young people, the quality of education, the quality of employment, the quality of careers, the HR development is certainly something that is plaguing the country and is going to plague the country for years to come. We have now turned the wheel, but we are that the country is going to pivot in the direction in which it is going. But there's certainly a lot of paddling along the way. And I certainly feel that mainly the quality of the education and the quality of the prospects and how the quality of the education in this country compares to the quality of education in other European and at least also regional centers will bear much on here. The brain recurring narrative in almost all of the countries in the world. But, for example, one of the earlier examples, Bulgaria, is now having a reactive process whereby they've had to increase wages because they're lacking workers, and some of the people are now coming back to work in Bulgaria. The quality of the ratio of brain drain will always be proportional to the quality of the future the young people see in the country. And unless politics and political elite and create a better future for them, a future in which they will not have to face petty crime and corruption, they will not have to face metastasizing of politics in everyday life, they will face better. It is certainly going to stop or decrease the brain drain. But the fact that young people vote with their feet and leave tells you that it's not such a pretty picture. Maybe we have chosen the right direction, but we still have a lot of distance to cover.
Many thanks. So, is it so compared to Serbia, for instance, there is the atmosphere for young people at the moment. In the moment, there is the bachelor degree, the university degree. In that moment, with the degree in hand, with the exam, just leaving the country. I suppose it's not the narrative, but because I would say there is still much more hope in the forthcoming parliamentary elections and even the achievements that were gained in the last years.
Well, there's a different narrative in Belgrade than in Skopje. Belgrade is much worse in the political sense, meaning that the overall capacity for democracy is much less, which may drive people abroad sooner, but the opportunities are much bigger. Belgrade itself is as big as North Macedonia. In North Macedonia, it's only Skopje. So although the democratic narrative may be a little more mellow, the opportunities are certainly smaller. The sort of aspirational pattern apparent in young people, especially millennials, is very difficult to achieve in such a small environment. Belgrade may be bigger, but it's much more repressive. So maybe those two variables even each other out to a certain degree.
So many thanks for all the insight and the explanations. I would like to lead the attention to our IDM initiative, What's the Matter Europe? We ask all who are watching us to participate with their short videos and of course on our YouTube channel, as well as the IDM website. And Petar, from North Macedonia watching our YouTube channel. So many thanks and goodbye.
Thank you, Silvia. Always a pleasure.